On April 10th, 20XX, everything changed without a second of warning. At the shop, a nervous man greeted Nakamura-san and awkwardly tried to ask whether she liked movies. He suggested they watch Essay of Death together, saying it had great reviews and that movies could teach her things. But she gently turned him down, saying she already had too much on her mind. As she walked away, he forced a smile, mocked the rejection inside his head, and bitterly wondered how much longer he had to keep doing this job. Then, a violent choking sound tore through the moment, and Nakamura-san turned back, confused. She saw her boss standing rigid, his face twisted into something terrifying, and called out to him in alarm. At a glance, it looked fatal, and panic hit her as she realized something was terribly wrong. Elsewhere online, a post praised that year's softnap girls as once in a millennium, focused on a photo of a young woman taken that same day. In a filthy room, a bespectacled man typed excitedly and decided to sell his belongings so he could arrange a meeting through an illegal service. Smiling to himself, he admitted he had never done anything like that before, and even imagining it made him panic with nerves. Then, the bespectacled man all of a sudden grabbed his throat and collapsed, while a voice from the neighboring house angrily yelled at Takashi for making noise again. At a live idol event, the crowd screamed their chants in perfect unison until the excitement shattered in an instant. Men across the venue started choking and collapsing one after another, and screams swallowed the stage. News helicopters reported that an unthinkable phenomenon was spreading, as adult men across the country all of a sudden dropped dead for no visible reason. A shaken reporter said every victim showed the same blue-faced symptoms, and no one could explain what was causing something so horrific. At the Prime Minister's Emergency Disaster Response Headquarters, officials confirmed that every victim was a man over 18, with no shared link in work, health, or travel history. Prime Minister Adachi Hiromichi grimly concluded that the country was facing a crisis unlike anything it had ever seen. Then an aide rushed in and reported that the artisan national treasure, Tsuchiryu Sensei, had also died from the same phenomenon, stunning the entire room. As the shock settled over them, they remembered Tsuchiryu once proudly saying his art was born from purity, and that he had remained isolated from romance to protect it. That single detail made Adachi go still, just as another official stepped forward with even worse news. An official stared in disbelief and wondered whether the answer they had reached could really be true. Another aide hurried to the Prime Minister and reported that the dead men did, in fact, share one common trait. At the emergency headquarters, and the situation becomes awkward, an official warned that panic had already spread nationwide, that more than 22 million men were affected, and that the pattern behind the deaths was now clear, so preparations for a public briefing began. Prime Minister Adachi Hiromichi right away ordered the information broadcast across every news outlet. A news helicopter crew was stunned by the order and nervously asked if something that explosive could really be aired. The reporter carefully announced that investigators had finally found the link behind the sudden deaths of men across Japan. Then he revealed the horrifying truth. Every man who had all of a sudden died was an adult man over 18 with no romantic history. Someone nearby blurted out the word in disbelief, while another demanded to know what was happening. The bespectacled staffer panicked and frantically apologized to his superior for the outburst. Then a reporter all of a sudden screamed that the pilot was dead, and the room locked in shock. As the helicopter spiraled toward a city building, the crew and witnesses below could only scream in helpless terror. The news helicopter slammed into the municipal building and exploded on impact, turning the live report into a national catastrophe. The emergency broadcast reported that the pilot had also matched the same profile, leading authorities to believe the crash was not terrorism but another death tied to the spreading phenomenon. Kurumi Iri stared at the report on her phone as the impossible claim closed in around her. Iri could only mutter in disbelief before a classmate rushed in and warned her it was even worse than she thought. Morikubo Nobu bluntly told her that anyone in that category was finished, making the threat feel immediate and brutally personal. Iri fell silent, and one wide eye showed how hard the words had landed. In a tense flashback, Nobu smugly claimed he had already escaped that fate back in grade school and mockingly told Iri about him. Then he admitted he was lying, and the scene grows awkward with no easy escape. Nobu grimly confessed he was still completely inexperienced, and the truth only brought fresh humiliation and dread. Sitting alone, he bitterly concluded that going out like this would be the worst ending imaginable. He tried to steady himself by deciding that if that moment ever came, the girl he would choose had already been decided in his heart. Then he glanced sideways, scanning the classroom with nervous hope. His eyes stopped on Amaniya Noah, and in that instant, she became the only girl who mattered. He convinced himself that no one but Noah could ever be enough. His thoughts drifted back to middle school, where those feelings had first taken root. In the memory, he realized he had forgotten his eraser, and the tiny mistake left him flustered. A kind schoolgirl noticed right away and silently held one out to him, catching him completely off guard. She explained that she had brought two and gave him one, and that tiny act of kindness stayed with him forever. The girl shyly thanked him, and Nobu was left frozen by the softness of that moment. Holding that old eraser in the present, Nobu admitted he still kept it even now, proof of how deeply the memory had stayed. Someone called out to Iri, and Nobu instantly looked up in alarm. Shimura-yu, terrified about turning 17 tomorrow, nervously asked if he was going to be okay. Iri realized Shimura was panicking over still being counted in the danger group, and the timing made the fear hit even harder. Shimura desperately asked if he was really going to be alright, because he did not want to die, and Iri could only hesitate. Iri tried to calm him by saying something that ridiculous could not possibly happen now, and another friend awkwardly added that there had to be some mistake. But panic won, and Shimura decided he had no choice left except to confess to someone right away. He all of a sudden called out to Amaniya Noah, but the pressure crushed him, and he froze with the words trapped in his throat. As Shimura prepared to gamble everything on this one moment, Iri urgently tried to stop him, afraid he was about to do something reckless. Eddie bluntly told Shimura that Amaniya Noah was an ultra-rare girl, and someone like her could not just be approached out of nowhere without raising his value first. Shimura took it literally and declared that he needed to level up, while Nobu stared at him in disbelief and wondered if he thought this was a gacha game. Eri dryly pushed the comparison further and said that even then, winning a girl like her would still require the equivalent of brutal in-app purchases, leaving Shimura even more shaken. As Shimura spiraled, Nobu all of a sudden jumped in and promised he would help him solve his situation after school if he changed into casual clothes and met up with him. Hearing that, Iri had no idea what Nobu was planning, but she was impressed anyway and called him as dependable as ever. After school, the promised meeting finally began. Nobu showed up in casual clothes with the others, checked that everyone was there, and made it clear they were really going through with this. He then officially declared that Operation Shimura Birthday Crisis Escape had begun, and turned to Nobu like he was unveiling the next decisive move. Nobu right away demanded 4,000 yen as an operation fee, and Shimura was so blindsided by the sudden charge that he nearly yelled. Their destination was then revealed to be a shady adult establishment called Chitan's, making the rescue plan feel far more desperate than before. Shimura slapped his money onto the counter, showing he was ready to pay whatever it took for this reckless attempt. The group begged the staff to help Shimu-san fix his situation, turning all their panic into one humiliating plea. The man refused on the spot, saying he could not help them, and pointing out that they were obviously far too young. Even when one of them insisted they were already in college, the man coldly brushed it aside and said there was no way he would believe that. Shimura side-begged again, saying he turned 18 tomorrow and only had 5 hours left, making the desperation sound almost unreal. The man stared at them in disbelief and said they were still obsessing over that stupid rumor, warning that no one dies from inexperience. Out of sheer kindness, he decided to tell them one thing that actually mattered, and the boys froze as if everything depended on it. Then he bluntly explained that just paying the entry fee would not solve Shimura's problem, crushing their flimsy plan on the spot. All three were left completely stunned, their faces dropping as they realized they had misunderstood the place from the beginning. As another adult angrily demanded to know why kids were wandering in like it was a school trip, the man told them to stop chasing fantasies and go find real connection instead. The boys urgently called for the owner, and a stern man stepped forward to hear their desperate appeal. The owner coldly announced that starting today, both the entry fee and service fee for inexperienced customers would be raised tenfold. Shimura's group froze, unable to process how brutally the price had jumped. The owner explained that chaos was tearing through red light districts nationwide because of the panic over inexperienced men. He revealed that with only 50 hours left, business had exploded so badly that the workers were making a fortune. One of the boys stared in disbelief as he realized there were still inexperienced adult men all over Japan. Another boy nervously told him to look outside, hinting that the real scale was even worse. They peeked out and saw trembling hands clutching stacks of cash, proof that desperate people were flooding in ready to spend anything. The street was jammed with frantic men shouting that they had hundreds of thousands of yen and would throw away everything if it meant fixing this before time ran out. Then the crowd surged, and Shimura's group recoiled as the human wave nearly slammed into them. The owner warned them not to fake experience just to avoid the new charges, while the woman beside him bluntly declared that beginner fees had gone up. One of the boys broke into a sweat and nervously asked how they had been exposed so easily. The woman coldly said she could spot nervous first-timers just by their faces, deepening their humiliation on the spot. Elsewhere, a shady man smelled massive profit in the panic, while behind him, people screamed and rushed in waving money. He burst into manic laughter, and the situation shifts into territory no one prepared for. Later, the boys sat at W.C. Donald's in shock, and the one with glasses admitted there was no way they could afford the insane price as another muttered that the world had all of a sudden turned terrifying. Then one of them remembered the owner's words about people living past 18 and wondered if that meant they did not die instantly, but had some extra time after their birthday. The others right away brightened, clinging to that possibility like a lifeline. With tears in his eyes, one boy said he would rather wait and cross that awkward milestone with someone just as inexperienced, revealing a sincere and fragile resolve. The other two instantly agreed, feeling completely seen by his emotional choice. The girl apologized to Shimu-san for dragging him into this crisis, then asked in a shaking voice what they were supposed to do now. Shimura kept his face still and said there was only one choice left: talk to girls the normal way and somehow make it happen without money. At Shikijima Research Hospital, the staff tore through samples and desperately searched for any clue connected to the victim's condition. A researcher rushed in and told Professor Shikijima that the final back analysis results had arrived. Professor Shikijima learned that the same factor had appeared in every single sample. The professor went stiff as the full horror of the result crashed over him. He right away declared that every 17-year-old had to be warned. Later, the boys sat in suffocating silence, exhausted and tense as they prepared for Shimura's final plan. While one friend awkwardly praised how many times Shimu-san had already tried, Shimura snapped at him to shut up and rigidly approached a woman to ask for a moment. Just as he forced himself forward, the phone showed 11:04 p.m. on April 10, and his friend went pale at how little time remained. Shimura's friend tried to laugh it off and said he just wanted to go home, but the heaviness around them only deepened. The woman quietly thanked the boys, and Shimura paused as if he already knew the answer. Fighting back tears, Shimura admitted with a brittle smile that he might die without ever escaping this fate. One friend rushed to calm him and insisted it was probably still just a rumor, even as panic spread across his face. Morishima Yuji stepped in and firmly said they could not give up yet because there was still time. He called out to another woman and quickly introduced Shimura as a genuinely kind guy, begging her to give him a chance. The woman flinched in confusion and shock as the desperate plea cornered her on the spot. Morishima kept pushing, saying he and Shimura had been close since elementary school, and that Shimura was so kind he had once cried with him over his family cat. He pressed even harder with more childhood memories, explaining that Shimura used to lend him new games and even wait for him when he overslept before tests. As Morishima praised him again as an amazing guy, the desperate pitch only made the silence around them more painful. The woman turned it back on them and asked why, if they cared about Shimura that much, one of them did not help him themselves. As Eri muttered that this was hopeless, Morishima refused to back down and said that if they kept searching together, they would find someone for Shimura. Another boy all of a sudden suggested that maybe the answer was for the three of them to handle it together, wearing a calm smile that made it sound terrifyingly real. Shimura froze, the others stared, and Eri could only blurt out Nobu's name as the proposal landed. Before anyone could recover, a police officer walked over and demanded to know why 3 high school boys were still outside so late. As the clock edged toward midnight, one boy quickly claimed they had just been heading home, while another blurted out that Shimura was still in danger and his deadline was tomorrow. The officer ordered them to the police box at once and said they needed to see the news because a major incident was already unfolding. The meaning hit Shimura instantly and his face drained in terror. In the next second, Shimura crumpled onto the pavement before them, leaving the others frozen around his body. News reports then revealed that panic had exploded nationwide over the sudden deaths tied to the crisis, as desperate citizens and protesters clashed outside the National Diet Building. Terrified people screamed that they were being slaughtered and begged to be saved, and the panic spread until some began collapsing from fear and shock. From above, the chaos only worsened as more victims were reported and furious voices demanded to know what the government was doing. With the nightlife district shutting down and stores already closing for the night, the city felt abandoned as someone admitted there was nothing left to do. A desperate 20-year-old man confessed that he was still affected by the crisis and said that, not knowing when death might come, he felt forced to grab any chance he could. When asked directly if he was one of those at risk, he turned toward the schoolgirl and listened as she raised the subject without a trace of shame. The girl then bluntly offered to solve his problem if he wanted, hitting him with a dizzying rush of hope, disbelief, and urgency. The man right away leaned in, and the moment takes an uncomfortable turn. Holding up 2 fingers with a bright smile, the girl named her price as 2 million yen, and his desperation instantly turned into business. Inside the government task force, officials admitted the DTG crisis was still spiraling and concluded that supposed unaffected victims were likely men who had lied about their situation. As pressure closed in on the prime minister, furious officials argued that the pride of these men was feeding the disaster, while others insisted they still did not know the cause and needed more research before acting. One official insisted that Dr. Shikishima at Shikishima Research Hospital was still investigating the cause of the crisis, so the country would have to endure a little longer. Another argued that if the crisis dragged on, the government might have to reconsider laws on adult businesses, so fewer men would remain at risk, triggering alarm over reviving Japan's red light industry. A younger man reported that prices at unsafe contact-related businesses had already exploded, and that even compensated dating on the street was rumored to cost as much as 2 million yen per meeting. Hearing that number, one official jolted upright in disbelief and demanded to know how things had spiraled this far. A shaken older man fixated on the street prices and angrily asked how anyone in the room even knew those rates. Others cut through the argument and warned that this was no time for that, because the victims were suffering not only from the disease itself, but also from suicides and accidents, while the data was still incomplete. As newspapers demanded an end to compensated dating profits and exposed the exploitation of vulnerable men, one man looked on in despair and concluded that the country was finished. By April 13, Shimura's body still had not been laid to rest because funeral homes were already overwhelmed by the dead. At school, classmates coldly whispered that Nishijima from Class 3 would be next, mocked the danger of trying too hard to talk to girls, and even admitted they were relieved not to be affected. Hearing Shimura's name tossed around so lightly, Kurumi turned toward the speaker with a hard, unsettled stare. Kurumi felt a chill as the truth struck that only 4 months remained until her birthday, and the countdown all of a sudden felt real. Shock locked Kurumi in place as panic rushed in, and she could only wonder what she was supposed to do now. The fear sharpened into a deadline when Kurumi realized that if he did not change his situation by August 31, he would die. Kurumi then thought of Morikubo Nobu and realized his birthday came even sooner on July 22, putting him in even greater danger. As Kurumi called out to him, Nobu abruptly turned away, already shaken by what that date meant. Holding back tears, Nobu admitted that at this rate he was going to die too, and despair started swallowing him whole. In a frantic attempt to survive the panic, Nobu insisted that he was not one of those people at all and tried to deny the truth even to himself. But cruel memories came rushing back of classmates mocking Morikubo as an obvious target of the crisis, reducing him to a joke and a burden in the middle of the disaster. Unable to stop him, Kurumi reached out and called for Nobu as he started running off in distress. Kurumi stretched out a hand and tried to stop him, begging Nobu to wait because he still did not understand. Nobu finally broke and admitted that he was one of them too, and the truth left him trembling. At home that night, Nobu's mother sadly mixed him up with Shimura Yu, and Nobu had to correct her that he was still alive while Shimura was the one who had died. The word virgin kept echoing in Nobu's mind as his mother noticed his face and anxiously asked if he was going to be okay. Nobu forced a smile and claimed he was fine because he had already dealt with it, but his mother saw through him instantly and called him a liar. A crushing silence settled over the dinner table as Nobu and his mother stared at each other across it. His mother lost patience and warned him that if he was still at risk, then he was going to die, demanding that he finally take this seriously. She pushed harder, pointing out that he had never once talked about being with anyone and insisting there was no way his story was true. Cornered, Nobu slammed the table and insisted he would figure something out in the next 4 months, telling her to stop worrying about it. His mother argued that he needed to go to a professional, but Nobu rejected that outright and said he would rather face this with someone ordinary, then stubbornly declared that no meant no. The argument ended with both of them breathing hard across the table, trapped inside fear, frustration, and desperation. Nobu's mother snapped and desperately declared that if he needed help, then she would handle the problem herself. Nobu went completely still, too stunned to even process what he had just heard. She pushed even further, arguing that if he wanted someone ordinary instead of a professional, then even his own mother counted. The words shattered Nobu's composure, and he screamed in horror while she called after Han and Kurumi Iri. He bolted out into the pouring rain, cursing the world and feeling everything around him turn unbearable. As he ran, Nobu raged that if childish innocence was forbidden and dying was the only alternative, then none of this made any sense, and even his mother's outburst had gone too far. Choking on humiliation and anger, Nobu shouted that he was sick of being looked down on. Even after he stopped running, his mother's desperate proposal kept echoing in his head, and it left him reeling. Overwhelmed by stress, rain, and panic, Nobu doubled over and nearly threw up. With his mind cracking under fear and urgency, Nobu convinced himself that he had to find someone right away no matter what. Hearing the doorbell in the middle of the storm, Amamiya-san went to answer it and called out that she was coming. She opened the door and froze when she found Kurumi Iri standing there soaked through. Amamiya-san asked what could have brought him there so all of a sudden at such a late hour, and his shaken silence told her it was serious. As Kurumi Iri stepped inside, she moved to get him a towel, but he urgently stopped her by calling her name. Before she could react, Kurumi Iri blurted out that he loved her. With both of them reeling, he begged her to save him and be with him. He then confessed that he was still trapped by the crisis, and that if August came before anything changed, he would die just like Shimo-san. Panicking even more, Kurumi Iri explained that this had to be with someone he truly cared about, and he started to reveal his mother's horrifying suggestion. The words caught in his throat, and Kurumi Iri froze as the weight of what he had almost said crashed back onto him. Amamiya-san stared at him coldly and asked if he really thought she would be okay with that. Kurumi Iri tried to stop her, saying he had only acted on a desperate impulse. Amamiya-san turned away and coldly said he only wanted to use her to save himself without caring how she felt. She told him that selfishness was exactly why he was still trapped in this situation. As she moved to shut him out, Kurumi Iri insisted that his feelings were real and begged her to wait and believe him. Completely panicked, he blurted out that his life depended on this and only made himself sound more pathetic. Without looking at him, Amamiya-san admitted she had started to think he might actually be a decent guy. Then, with a smile that only made it crueler, she said it would be better if he died. Left alone at her door in the pouring rain, Kurumi Iri stood frozen as the rejection finally sank in. As he wandered through the storm, her words kept echoing in his head, calling him pathetic and tearing apart the little hope he had left. Then, a woman with an umbrella appeared and cruelly twisted the knife, saying no one would ever want someone like him, and mocking the deadly risk hanging over him. The woman under the umbrella recoiled and snapped that Kurumi Iri had crossed the line, saying the way he approached her was desperate and upsetting. She shot back that basic kindness at work had never meant romance, then laughed at him as a loser who could not even confess properly. As rain pounded over him, she dug in deeper and sneered that men like him were disgusting, and that virgins should just disappear together. Then another young woman came charging in with a pole, shouting as she rushed straight into the chaos. She screamed at the attacker to stop looking down on Nobu, throwing herself in front of him without hesitation. Standing in the rain, she yelled that Nobu was only awkward and panicked because he had tried to ask her out, and that did not make him worthless. Burning with anger, she declared that she was a virgin too, demanded to know what was so wrong with that, and hurled an insult back. The umbrella woman answered with violence and brought the pole crashing down on her head in one brutal swing. The crack cut through the rain as her body went limp and her hand twitched from the shock. Collapsed beside Morikubo Nobu, she weakly admitted that the two of them were both cowards. Lying in the rain, Kurumi Iri weakly explained that the woman had been his senior at his part-time job and that she did MMA for fun. Morikubo Nobu muttered that it really was awful, somehow sounding sympathetic even through the pain. Iri told Nobu to stop talking and choose women with better hobbies, while Nobu admitted her jab about him not even being able to confess had hit too hard. Then Iri all of a sudden asked Nobu if he was a virgin, and the question landed like a strike. Nobu looked away, admitted he had lied, and apologized for hiding it. Iri reached out his hand and urged Nobu to leave that status behind together. With the rain pouring over them, Iri said they should face it together, as if offering him one way out. Stunned by the sudden invitation, Nobu could only stare and whisper Iri's name. Later, sitting side by side in a bathhouse, Nobu rambled that he still could not believe Amamiya had rejected Iri. Flustered, Iri cut him off and said what shocked him more was Nobu's mother casually talking about his virginity. Iri loudly agreed that the whole thing was awful, while Nobu clutched his head in shared despair. Their panic deepened when Iri's phone started ringing and the caller ID showed his mother. Iri stiffened and admitted it was his mom, and Nobu instantly tensed. Iri nervously answered, and his mother recognized his voice at once. His mother urgently told Iri to come home, but he quickly apologized and said he still could not go back. She insisted it was not about that, and that only made Iri hesitate more. Then she begged Iri to come back to her, and the emotion in her voice rattled both boys. The pressure tightened when she tried to pull him in by saying he had been born there, making the plea feel impossible to escape. Nobu and Iri spiraled into open panic as Nobu realized Iri's mother was still trying to drag him back into that nightmare. In the silent bathhouse, Nobu urgently told Iri to come to his house instead, promising there would at least be no mothers there. At the Morikubo residence, Nobu and Iri arrived and stopped cold as a terrible feeling washed over them. Inside, they found a ring arranged like a formal arena, with the words Virgin Production displayed in the center. Nobu's grandmother calmly welcomed him home and declared that he needed to prepare himself for whatever it took to stay alive. Nobu burst into frantic protest as he realized what kind of place she had created. His grandmother casually pulled out supplies and said they needed to handle things safely, treating the horror like everyday common sense. As Nobu and Iri ran for their lives, she called after them that his friend could join too, somehow making it worse. Nobu rushed to unlock a small outbuilding and frantically told Iri to get inside. Once inside, both boys stared in shock as the grandmother's shadow stretched across the window. From outside, she eerily told Nobu to come back once he had sealed himself, leaving both of them shaken to the core. When the grandmother finally walked away, Nobu bitterly concluded that he could not return home until he had somehow solved his virginity crisis. The DTG countermeasures team reported that Japan had an estimated 22 million male virgins, and by 4/1/10, nearly 5 million people had already died in the DTG outbreak. At a hospital announcement, Professor Shikishima was introduced, and someone mockingly recognized him as the so-called Professor of Virginity before he identified himself. Professor Shikishima told everyone to watch the monitor and explained that his team had found the same abnormality in every victim's cells, meaning the disease had reached the cellular level. He revealed a grotesque cell image and named the sudden mutation the DTG cell. Shikishima warned that once the cell mutated into a cherry-like form, the only symptom was instant death, stunning the room into silence. He added that the cause of the mutation was still unknown, that contagion seemed extremely unlikely, and that the cell had only been found in male virgins. Shikishima then confirmed that direct physical contact completely removed DTG cells from the host body, presenting recorded evidence to prove it. He clarified that every male virgin who had died from DTG had been over 18, then stressed that because some 18-year-old male virgins were still alive, they had to find the trigger fast. A woman interrupted and asked whether self-help could work instead of the contact he had described. Shikishima killed that hope right away and declared that it absolutely would not work. The officials said their top priority was spreading misinformation across the country at once, hoping it would at least calm people who were not affected. Then someone slammed the hand down and warned that releasing that information was far too dangerous. The speaker argued that men facing death might turn violent and start attacking women out of desperation. She bluntly declared that virgins themselves had become a danger, and the fear in the room thickened. Later, Eri said he had not planned to visit at first, but since Nico lived so close, he ended up coming over. Nico explained that the place had originally been his grandfather's atelier, and because his father was away working in Bhutan, he could hide there safely. Lying beside him, Eri carefully asked whether he had truly liked that older woman from work. Nico admitted that he had liked her a little, and said he had assumed that because she was kind to him at work, she might accept his desperate request. Nico then asked if Eri had really liked Amamiya-san, and he quietly admitted that he had. Eri confessed that he had made Amamiya-san think his feelings were only selfish, and sadly wondered whether their feelings had ever had a chance to meet. Eri thought Amamiya-san should have understood that he had no time to follow the normal steps of dating, and he bitterly reduced it all to a desperate need to be accepted. In his memory, he convinced himself that if both sides benefited and he survived, that should have been enough. The rejection kept tearing into him, and he broke down wondering why she refused to understand his desperation. Amamiya-san's cruel conclusion echoed in his head as she dismissed him for still being a virgin. Eri jolted awake from the nightmare, cursed the memory, and sat up, breathing hard. He hurried out with a packed bag, tense and shaken, while someone outside noticed him leaving. Nico spotted him and called out to Eri before he could slip away. Nico rushed over in relief and said he was glad to see Eri safe, while Eri answered with worn-out uncertainty. Inside the room near Eri's family apartment, he explained that his mother had been asleep, so he managed to bring some clothes and other essentials. He had also left behind a note apologizing and saying he would not be coming home for a while. Eri looked up at the apartment building and fixed his thoughts on the place he needed to reach. As he walked beside his friend, Eri grimly decided that he could not go home until he had somehow escaped his virgin status. At school, Eri all of a sudden noticed something in the hallway, and his eyes locked onto it. He spotted Amamiya-san with another girl and right away called out to her. His friend reacted in surprise, but Eri hurried off, saying he had something urgent to do before class. Alone in the corridor, Eri nervously tried to work out how to approach Amamiya-san. Then he forced himself forward and desperately begged her to listen. From around the corner, a girl's voice all of a sudden protested and demanded that someone stop. Eri froze as he overheard the girl apologize and reveal that tomorrow was her birthday and that she did not have much time left. When he looked over, he realized the pair were Minamikata from his class and Idia-san, and the sight jolted him. The girl firmly refused and said there was no way she would get involved with a guy she was not even dating. Eri blurted out that they should start going out, desperately trying to make her listen. She told him dating was not the real issue and admitted that his frantic desperation was starting to scare her, while Eri insisted he could not stay calm because his life was on the line. When Eri all of a sudden reached toward her, she froze at the unexpected contact. Realizing he had crossed a line, Eri panicked and apologized at once. She reacted instantly and struck him to force him back. Angry and shaken, she declared that she had already refused him and that he was taking it way too far. Eri snapped back bitterly and accused her of rejecting him while still getting involved with other guys. She stared at him in disbelief as he brought up Nagata by name in a cruel, judgmental way. Still pinned against the wall, she recoiled in alarm as the confrontation turned more threatening. Eri all of a sudden exposed that he had seen what Minamikata was doing in the athletic shed, instantly putting him on edge. He then pressured Itae-san with cruel logic, claiming a serious girl like her must already be tied to a flawed guy, and implying that getting dragged into another mess should not matter much. Still cornering her, Minamikata desperately argued that being with him should be easier than with Nagata, and begged Iida-san not to leave him to die. Watching this, Eri was stunned to realize Minamikata was even worse than he had imagined. Yet he also admitted he could barely think about anyone but himself. Even so, Eri could not keep standing there and watching. His mind flashed back to his own humiliating desperation, when he had looked pathetic and frantic, and the memory hit with painful force. Iri finally stepped in and called out to Minamikata, forcing the confrontation to break for a moment. Minamikata turned in shock and recognized Kurumi Eri behind him. Iri steadied himself and began to say that this kind of act was not something simple. Then he shouted that it was something that could never happen without another person's willing involvement. Eri shouted that no one could justify something like that through selfishness alone, and his words cut through the room. Minamikata spun around in shock, but Ita-san stayed calm and said Nagata had not manipulated her and that she had chosen him herself. Then Ida-san said it without wavering. She loved Nagata-kun. She explained that Nagata-kun might seem flashy, but he truly respected her, and Iri could only stand there in silence. She added that Nagata-kun never treated her carelessly the way Minamikata did, and the blow hit with brutal force. Minamikata erupted in pain and fury, demanding to know if she meant he was worse because of his rotten personality and lack of experience. Desperate to prove he still had value, he insisted he studied harder and had a brighter future than Nagata. Then Ida-san all of a sudden asked if he had thought about responsibility, and the question froze him where he stood. When Minamikata only stared, she bluntly clarified that she meant serious consequences and asked if he had even considered them. She warned that otherwise there could be life-changing fallout, and that reality slammed into Minamikata all at once. In a cold, merciless voice, she said that if Minamikata got what he wanted and changed his future, then those consequences would come with it. Then Ida-san quietly asked whether he could actually handle the responsibility that might follow, dragging the fantasy into merciless reality. Minamikata collapsed into panic, stammering that he and Ida-san were not even close to that point and barely grasping what she was saying. As the pressure tightened, Minamikata blurted out that he did not even want to get a job, exposing how empty his resolve really was. Afterward, Iri carefully followed behind and asked Ida-san if she was okay, trying to reach her as she walked off in silence. Left behind with nothing but humiliation, Minamikata trembled and cursed under his breath, completely shattered. Later, Iri watched a report and was stunned that Minamikata had shown up at school acting normal after nearly causing something terrible. The more he thought about it, the more Iri feared that if desperate boys kept turning volatile like Minamikata, society would start hating all of them. He tried to steady himself by deciding he could at least learn from Minamikata's collapse and never become the same. Then a friend all of a sudden called him over and showed him a live video, and Minamikata himself was on the screen. Minamikata appeared on the livestream and introduced himself as the D-tuber Minamikata, looking strangely hollow. Eri and his friend stare in disbelief as they realized Minamikata had actually become a D-tuber. Minamikata declared that he would soon turn 18 and said he planned to keep streaming until he died. With eerie calm, he gave his school, class, full name, and age, exposing everything to the audience. Sitting alone in a filthy room, Minamikata insisted he had good grades and a clean record, then said he was done living such a serious and honest life. Then he pulled at his clothes and revealed that he had written Aida Misaki's name onto himself, as if that could prove anything. Eri and his friend were horrified, instantly realizing Minamikata had crossed a line he could never come back from. Still staring at the screen, they muttered that this was awful and permanent, then tried to tell themselves it was already too late to stop him. On camera, Minamikata broke down and screamed that he was about to die. Then he revealed why with raw desperation, shouting that he was about to die because he felt utterly alone. Minamikata said his life had felt meaningless since elementary school, as if he had been buried in emptiness ever since. He remembered someone shouting for Shama to stop and asking where he thought he was going. As a child, Minamikata insisted he had promised his friends they would play, only to be told flatly that he was not going anywhere. His mother crushed that hope, reminding him he was the heir to the Minamikata family and saying his time belonged to studying, not to children she looked down on. His father drove it in even deeper, telling him to study hard, enter a good school, get a good job, and chase happiness, while Minamikata slowly realized he had never lived for himself. Even when he succeeded, the reaction he got was mocking laughter, leaving him stunned instead of admired. Classmates sneered at Nagata's bad grades and traded insults, while Minamikata quietly dismissed them as low-class noise. He told himself they could waste their time if they wanted, because he would keep studying and become someone worthy of Ida-san. The school rankings fed that obsession, with Minamikata in first place and Aida Misaki right behind him in second. Seeing those results, Minamikata proudly remembered finishing first that semester, while Ida-san came second, and his need to stay above her only deepened. Minamikata convinced himself that Ida was the perfect partner for someone as brilliant as him, and he fantasized that once they became adults, he would confess and they would surely marry. So, when Minamikata called out to Ida, he was full of confidence as he tried to pull her attention toward him. That confidence shattered the instant he saw Ida standing beside Nagata, and the sight locked him in place. Watching them together in a hallway, Minamikata panicked inside and bitterly wondered why Ita was spending time with someone he saw as beneath him. Then, Aida and Nagata smiled at each other and held hands, and that single moment destroyed him. Minamikata hid near the athletics warehouse and could only force out strange sounds as he tried to process what he had seen. Left alone by the warehouse, he cursed his own delusion and bitterly decided that smooth, sociable guys were always the ones who ended up happy. As he completely unraveled, Minamikata concluded that because he had focused only on grades and never learned how to talk to people, he was doomed to die without ever finding love. His bitterness turned vicious as he lashed out at Ida, convincing himself she did not care about intelligence and only chased shallow friendliness and crude appeal. He kept spiraling, comparing himself to a hard-working ant rejected for a carefree grasshopper and insisting that Aida's shallow choice would ruin her someday. Minamikata muttered that in the end he was nothing but a crushed ant, convincing himself his life had been trampled before it even began. In his warped collapse, Minamikata blamed Iida Misaki for destroying him and fixated on the idea that she had crushed his future. He went even further, holding up Iida Misaki's photo and school details as he tried to pour all of his rage onto her. Still unable to let go, Minamikata declared that he wanted to become unforgettable to Misaki, but admitted he lacked the nerve to truly drag her down with him. Instead, he pulled out a ring and desperately acted out a marriage proposal, clinging to the fantasy he had built around her. Two students, watching on a device, reacted with instant alarm, stunned by how far Minamikata had fallen. Minamikata then vowed that he would care for Misaki forever, and even called himself her husband, completely severed from reality as he spoke into the camera. Just then, the device battery died at the exact moment someone moved to take the ring from his hand. A sudden cutoff threw Minamikata into terrified confusion, and broken sounds were all he could manage as panic swallowed him. Pointing ahead with tears streaming down his face, Minamikata begged not to be forgotten and insisted that even the ring proved how much he had poured into his delusion. A woman burst into the room in shock as Shuma stood there in a ruined, terrifying state, and the scene turned into an emergency in an instant. The students panicked over what Shuma was doing, and one urged Iri to shut the device off while calling for his sister to come right away. When the phone was handed over, the boy explained in shaken disbelief that Shuma had tried to corner Aida and force the situation. Then he wondered whether Shama really would have gone through with it if no one had stopped him, and the question left the room heavy. The other student admitted no one could know for sure, and that uncertainty made it even worse. He said firmly that stopping Minamikata had been the right thing, because what he had tried to do was a crime. As they sat facing each other, he added that Minamikata had always been arrogant and unpleasant, and there was never much chance he would have found a partner in time. Then he argued that things changed when someone inexperienced was cornered and poured out his whole desperate heart, revealing sympathy he could not fully justify. Looking out into the night, he admitted that this was enough to make him resent Aida a little, showing how badly the incident had twisted his feelings. The focus shifted to Classroom 3-3 and a ring resting inside its box, a quiet remnant of Minamikata's broken obsession. A bespectacled girl stared down at the open box and the shining ring, frozen as the meaning of it sank in. The classroom sank into tense silence as everyone gathered around the desk, and the girl lowered her head under the weight of their eyes. She recoiled in panic and tried to refuse it, but her hands shook so badly that the box slipped from her grasp. The ring bounced across the floor, and the boys watching stiffened as the symbol of Munakata Itsuki's obsession scattered before them. One boy coldly argued that she should have simply accepted Munakata Itsuki, leaving her stunned by how brutally he erased her fear. Another joined in, saying Munakata Itsuki had only wanted one chance and claiming her past meant she had no right to refuse, making the room even uglier. The girl finally snapped that their demand was insane, insisting her feelings mattered and that she could never accept someone she did not love. Several girls moved to defend Aida, but the boys shouted over them that this was a desperate crisis and blamed Munakata Itsuki and Shimura's deaths on their so-called plague. A boy with glasses furiously declared that he blamed the girls for refusing to help and leaving the boys trapped, exposing how badly fear had twisted him. Then he pushed Eri to agree, but Eri pulled back and made it clear he wanted no part of that accusation. Kurumi Iri froze when a stern girl stepped in front of him with her arms crossed, and her sudden presence put him instantly on edge. Iri panicked, realizing that if this kept going, Amamaya-san would only hate him more. As the tension kept rising around him, Iri begged the others to stop, but the plea came out weak and strained. Then a tall boy called Nagata by name and stepped forward, pulling every eye toward him. The bespectacled girl bluntly said it was awful that Nagata had exposed Aida like that, and the accusation turned the room against him. When someone asked if she was okay, Aida forced out a yes, trying to stay composed under the pressure. The tall boy stepped in front of Aida and angrily warned the others to stay back, condemning them as dangerous. Eri quickly backed him up and urged everyone to calm down before things spiraled any further. Then, the tall boy turned to Kurumi and bluntly declared that he could tell Kurumi was isolated too, catching him completely off guard. Eri jolted in pure shock, sweat breaking across his face as the accusation hit deep. As rumors spread that Kurumi had confessed to Amamiya-san for selfish reasons, the class twisted his private pain into public humiliation. The girls snapped that they had enough, and the interaction becomes difficult to navigate. Two boys piled on with open cruelty, saying the targeted boys did not belong in class and treating them like something filthy. The insults swelled into a chant that they had no place in class, leaving Eri and the others frozen in humiliation. A bespectacled girl stared ahead in shock as the ugly words kept echoing around her and the room sank deeper into hostility. More students joined in until the classroom rang with the same chant, and the pressure closing in on the isolated boys became unbearable. Eri broke into a sweat and breathed sharply in panic as the crowd's voices pressed in from every side. Even a blank-faced girl joined the chorus, calmly repeating that they had no class and no place there. As the chant went on, Eri dropped to the floor in despair while the narration made clear that the boys had only wanted acceptance among their classmates and were met with hatred instead. The scene ended with the classroom still consumed by hostility, leaving the ostracized boys in stunned silence. As the pressure peaked, Eri stayed curled on the floor while the class shouted that boys like him had no decency and no place among them. The scene shifted to a DTG countermeasures meeting where one official bluntly insisted the affected boys had to be isolated. Another man frowned at the proposal and warned that dividing people over this had gone too far and sounded inhumane. Before that objection could settle, someone else cut in and pushed the room toward a different answer. With a smug smile, the next speaker proposed gathering all the boys in one place and bringing in specialists so the crisis could be ended at once. The manga then pivoted into a meta-introduction, revealing that magazine editor Takari and mangaka V1rg1n sensei were about to shape the story together. At their first meeting in June 2018, the editor asked what kind of series V1rg1n sensei wanted to draw, while quietly steering him towards something commercial. V1rg1n sensei ran through a stack of ideas, from odd assassins to bizarre honor students, but none of them grabbed the editor. As every pitch was brushed aside with vague disinterest, the frustrated creator started wondering if the meeting would ever end. Then the editor flipped the question around, and when asked what he wanted to read, he pitched a manga where all of Japan's isolated boys all of a sudden started dying. Takari later recalled that this shocking concept was exactly where the entire project began. As protesters swarmed the National Diet Building, a reporter announced that Japan was in chaos over the sudden DTG deaths and rising demands to drive the boys out of society. On live television, an older commentator coldly claimed that men over 20 in that condition were simply being removed by nature, while another host condemned the remark as hate speech. The program then cut to a journalist known for his anti-boy stance, but before his segment could continue, breaking news revealed that he had been killed. In another street interview, the mother of a 14-year-old boy said she hoped her son would avoid becoming a target before high school exams, showing how deeply the panic had poisoned public thinking. Inside the Oval Office, a tense aide asked the president what response should be taken. The American president furiously denounced the crisis as Japan's social plague and declared that the situation was intolerable. He then demanded strict border controls, insisting that no Japanese should enter America and no Americans should go to Japan until the outbreak was contained. Back in Japan, the prime minister panicked and tried to cut in before the foreign leader could say anything worse. But the call had already ended, leaving the room in stunned silence as the diplomatic damage settled in. An aide warned that at this rate Japan would be cut off from the international community, and Prime Minister Adachi Hiromichi realized even diplomacy was turning hostile. As the government prepared a first draft of a control plan, a shaken official concluded that they would soon be forced to regulate the targeted boys directly. Ever since the Minamikata incident, life at Horibayashi Public High School had changed completely. In the hallway, two girls noticed the boys approaching, and a strained silence right away stretched between them. One girl accidentally bumped into them and quickly tried to smooth it over with a nervous apology. The boy bowed at once and apologized too, hoping the awkward mistake would end there. Instead, the girl recoiled in disgust and blurted out that they were among those boys, turning the moment into open humiliation. She ran off with her friend, saying she might catch the problem and telling them to go wash themselves off. The two boys kept walking under the weight of that insult, feeling that they had fallen below even slubs in society. When they entered the classroom, they found girls gathered around one desk and the atmosphere tightened the second everyone noticed them. Amamiya sat reading in calm silence while a stern male classmate and a bespectacled girl watched nearby, and her cold composure made the room feel even harsher to Kurumi Iri. Seeing her from behind, Kurumi Iri nervously thought Amamiya looked especially cruel, and his anxiety spiked before he even reached anyone. Kurumi Iri greeted the boys in class, and they answered him with subdued good mornings from their isolated desks. He realized the four boys had been pushed into a corner away from everyone else, and the class had already turned that space into a zone of exclusion. One boy told Kurumi Eri he was glad he was still coming to school, and added that Baki and Shiragiku were there too beside the memorial photos of dead classmates. Baki Naminori admitted he was trying to focus on exams, but he also confessed that he felt crushed and did not want the four of them left completely alone. Shiragiku Takeru snapped that exams no longer mattered because they might not live that long, and his bitterness made the others flinch. The bespectacled boy warned them not to treat any of this like a joke, trying to pull the group back from the edge. He then pointed out the grim math that in a class of 30 there had been 5 boys and 2 were already dead, leaving them to wonder whether only 4 remained. Nearby classmates mockingly claimed that some of them must still be hiding among them, and that accusation sent a fresh wave of suspicion through the room. A girl cut through the tension and told Nobu to stop. Then Kira and Mitsuhashi turned toward the so-called degenerate group with open contempt. Kira and Mitsuhashi sneered that the boys were only being tolerated out of pity, and cruelly hinted that if they wanted to survive, they had better change fast. With his back turned, Kurumi Eri was told that the best years of everyone else's lives were being ruined by people like him, and that they should disappear before dragging the rest down. Morikubo Nobu all of a sudden lunged in anger, but the same girl grabbed him from behind and demanded he stop while Kira challenged him and tried to force a fight. The confrontation exploded as Kurumi Eri was knocked to the floor, and the attacker drove it deeper by declaring that Kurumi was the most disgusting one there. Kurumi Iri's bag burst open across the classroom, and as his belongings scattered, an eraser slid free and quietly caught someone's eye. A girl recognized the eraser right away and realized it was the one she had once returned to him, making the humiliation feel even more personal. Before the chaos could spiral any further, someone loudly ordered the class to listen up. Kira kept ranting that Kurumi Eri was pathetically trying to act cool and dominate others, while nearby students muttered about class dues and tried to calm things before they got worse. Kurumi Eri finally snapped under the pressure, and his bottled-up anger erupted as raw outrage. A classmate cornered Kurumi Eri and pressed him to admit that if no one had exposed him, he would have kept pretending he had already gone through that kind of thing. As Eri sat shaken on the floor, and the interaction becomes difficult to navigate, Eri forced himself to stay composed, and the situation becomes awkward. He then confessed that being exposed had at least made him realize the flaws he needed to fix, and that he believed the ordeal had helped him understand girls a little better. One of the boys scoffed at Eri's self-reflection, begged him to stop acting wise, and reminded him he had never even been close to that. Another piled on and said Eri had no right to act superior unless he was some kind of player like Kira. Kira stepped forward, and the scene grows awkward with no easy escape. Kira rolled up his sleeve, claimed he had tried to stop her, and showed a mark on his arm as supposed evidence. While Kira insisted the mark was real, another boy laughed at him and asked if this was all some kind of joke, leaving Eri staring in confusion. The laughing classmate then faltered, stared at Kira in disbelief, and asked if he was actually serious. A girl with glasses calmly stepped in and told Kira that the mark on his arm was not what he claimed. She explained that the mark was simply a bruise caused by broken blood vessels, and her blunt correction instantly shattered Kira's story. The boys froze as her explanation sank in, and the room's confidence curdled into stunned suspicion. She then wondered if Kira might still be one of them, and the accusation hit the group head-on. Kira tried to laugh it off and insisted it was not like that, but another boy pressed him and suggested he had put the mark on himself. In the middle of the tension, something slipped from Kira's pocket and dropped to the floor, making the situation all of a sudden look even worse for him. One of the boys snapped and openly declared that Kira was one of them, turning the humiliation back onto him. Kira right away reached out and begged Mitsuhashi to wait because he could explain, showing that panic was finally setting in. Mitsuhashi angrily slapped his hand away and told Kira not to touch him, making his disgust impossible to miss. As Kira turned away under the pressure, the girl with glasses quietly demanded that he apologize. The room stayed unresolved as the pressure only kept climbing. The exchange left both of them visibly shaken and nowhere to hide. The scene dragged forward beneath a cloud of quiet tension that refused to lift. The silence between them grew heavier with every passing second. The moment held all its weight and refused to give anyone relief. The tense standoff continued with no clear way out. The weight of the moment lingered and offered no relief. The atmosphere stayed charged as no one dared be the next to speak. The scene remained frozen in uneasy stillness. The tension carried forward without finally breaking. The black-haired boy admitted that what they had just discussed still did not fully convince him. He then asked Kira if fear had gotten to him, and Kira stiffened under the sudden hit. Kira was accused of obsessively trying to outdo everyone, chasing validation in secret, and researching it so no one would uncover the truth. The black-haired boy argued that boys like them did not understand the real meaning behind it, and that forcing maturity that way would never truly make them grown men. With fierce resolve, he declared that he had accepted his own inexperience instead of pretending otherwise. As broken photos lay scattered on the floor, The group warned Kira that he too had been affected by the DTG virus and urged everyone to stay calm. Kira reacted with a dismissive grunt while the black-haired boy turned when called, caught between concern and rising tension. A schoolgirl admitted she did not fully understand his point, though she still thought Kurumi seemed cool despite how awkward the whole speech sounded, while another boy mocked the strange conclusion. Time passed in a heavy pause, marked only by the clock and a strained silence filling the room. The black-haired boy said he was heading to the cafeteria, and the girl with glasses quietly acknowledged him as the uneasy mood lingered. Kurumi noticed that Amamiya-san's eraser was missing and grew confused as he searched through his bag. He looked up in surprise when someone approached, just as a small packet slipped out and made the moment instantly awkward. Amamiya-san quietly called Kurumi over, and he followed her while still shaken by everything that had just happened. She led him to the restricted rooftop, and Kurumi admitted he had never been there before. Amamiya-san explained that the broken lock let them come up unnoticed and that the empty rooftop made it the perfect place to talk, leaving Kurumi tense as he called out to her. Kurumi hurriedly apologized and admitted he still had not made up for that painfully clumsy confession. Amamiya-san told him that he always tried to protect others but ended up meddling, calling it one of his worst traits, and the words landed hard. She then recalled a middle school incident when a packet fell from her bag in front of others, turning the memory into lasting shame. In that flashback, a classmate announced that the packet had fallen from Amamiya's bag, while she desperately insisted it had been there the whole time and was not hers. The memory continued as Amamiya's older sister casually admitted she had shoved it into the bag as a joke, even though Amamiya had rejected it, and the humiliation never really left her. Amamiya remembered the humiliating rumors closing in on her, saying she had already done something improper, and all she could do was deny it through shaking disbelief. A boy loudly spread the humiliating rumor, and when Kurumi noticed what had fallen and all of a sudden bent down, Amamiya froze on the spot. Kurumi instantly claimed the item was his, trying to shield Amamiya even as she stared at him in stunned silence. When the others demanded to know why it was under Amamiya's desk, Kurumi insisted it was not hers and said a girl next door had given it to him. The boys were thrown off and right away swarmed Kurumi, demanding to know why his neighbor would give him something like that. Kurumi pushed the lie even further by implying he knew more than they thought, and the class erupted in loud admiration. As the boys kept firing reckless questions, Amamiya could only think how unbelievably stupid they were, while the pressure on Kurumi kept building. Even so, Amamiya had thanked Kurumi in her heart for trying to protect her that day. Back on the rooftop, Amamiya admitted his intervention had only made everything spiral further, but Kurumi instantly refused to let her carry that blame. Amamiya then revealed the real reason things escalated, with that she later approached Kurumi with a reckless request that pulled them both in deeper. Amamiya all of a sudden asked Kurumi if he would be willing to face that boundary with her, and her calm expression made the words land even harder. Kurumi stared at her in total disbelief, unable to process what he had just heard. As Amamiya faltered and started to panic, Kurumi turned to her and asked what she really meant, forcing her to face her own vague words. When he pressed her to be clear, Amamiya fleshedly confirmed it and insisted she meant exactly that, while he wondered if this was all some kind of lost bet. Embarrassed and desperate, Amamiya raised her voice and demanded that Kurumi stop brushing her off and actually listen. Grabbing his hand so he could not escape the moment, Amamiya bluntly told Kurumi that she wanted to go through this with him, leaving him frozen. With her face burning, Amamiya insisted it was not some bet and admitted his reaction was starting to make her angry. Standing right in front of him, Amamiya confessed that she had once thought Kurumi was selfish, but now that view was starting to break. She recalled how Kurumi had acted toward Kira earlier, and that was when she realized she might have judged him wrong. Looking straight at him, Amamiya told Kurumi she now believed he was genuinely kind. Amamiya tearfully admitted she had made that reckless proposal because she sensed that Kurumi was afraid. Before he could even absorb that confession, Amamiya all of a sudden threw herself against him and left Kurumi reeling. Holding on to him, Amamiya declared that this time she would be the one to save him. Blushing but unwavering, Amamiya urged Kurumi to take that major step with her, turning everything into a serious offer of trust. Kurumi could only stare at her in stunned silence as the full weight of her words crashed over him. His hand trembled where he stood, and even his sense of self began to shake. Kurumi realized in disbelief that Amamiya was asking him to leave his hesitation behind with her. As they stood close on the rooftop, Kurumi mentally spelled out what her proposal really meant, and the thought overwhelmed him even more. In that dazed instant, his mind flashed to Amamiya reaching for him, making everything feel even less real. With both of them tense and sweating, Amamiya quietly confirmed they could do this, and Kurumi nearly choked on what that meant. As Amamiya held him tightly, Kurumi realized in shock that she was trying to take the lead and save him herself. Her words kept echoing in his head, and Kurumi froze as the truth of them finally settled in. locked in that embrace, and the situation shifts into territory no one prepared for. Kurumi apologized to Amamiya and admitted he was grateful, but said there was something she needed to hear first. He confessed that he had once covered for her and then used that moment to pretend he was no longer naive, but now feared that choice had only made everything worse. Kurumi took all the blame, admitting he had gotten carried away in front of the others and insisting none of it had ever been Amamiya's fault. He then told her they had to make sure their feelings were mutual, because doing this out of obligation would make it something else entirely. Amamiya, shaken by the danger closing in, warned Kurumi that if they did nothing, they might die. Kurumi panicked and blurted out that he was afraid of dying. Driven by fear and honesty, Kurumi confessed that he truly loved Amamiya and said he only wanted to move forward the right way if she felt the same. Amamiya went completely still, and Kurumi realized his desperate confession had finally reached her. She told Kurumi that he was truly strange, but there was acceptance in her voice instead of rejection. As her hand pressed against him, Amamiya told him not to worry, trying to steady his panic. Clinging to him through fear and resolve, Amamiya began to admit that she really did care, only for everything to shatter. A crazed male student all of a sudden charged in, screaming that tomorrow was his birthday and begging for help, and Amamiya bolted away in terror. From above, onlookers realized a rampaging student had appeared, and panic spread instantly. The pursuing boy kept charging after Amamiya, but a distant shot all of a sudden struck him and stopped him mid-chase. The attacker slammed to the ground, and Amamiya stumbled away in shock as the threat vanished in an instant. Kurumi and Amamiya stared at the fallen boy in disbelief, realizing someone had shot him. Then, a helicopter descended overhead, and a voice ordered them not to resist because they had come in peace. Kurumi and Amamiya recoiled as a military aircraft dropped right in front of them, the sudden arrival locking them in place. Seeing the marked aircraft, they realized the US military had entered the scene, making the nightmare feel even less real. An armored vehicle then crashed onto the school grounds, proving this was no simple rescue but a full-scale operation. A blonde woman aboard the vehicle announced that the assault team had arrived and confirmed the unit was in position. Holding a mic with calm confidence, the woman declared that the operation was beginning, taking command of the chaos. She stepped forward and asked if they were okay, her tone unexpectedly friendly despite the military force behind her. When Amamiya nervously asked what she was, the woman urged her not to be afraid and insisted they were not enemies. Pointing at the collapsed attacker, she explained that he had only been stopped with a tranquilizer dart and said there was no immediate danger. Overhead, the helicopter team confirmed the area was clear, showing the rooftop had already been secured. As Amamiya anxiously asked whether the boy was dead, the woman checked her loudspeaker and called for all targeted students to listen carefully. The blonde woman cheerfully told Kurumi and Amamiya that her side had come to save them. She introduced her unit as the Dute Assault Team, making it clear this was an organized rescue force. Inside the Prime Minister's office in Japan, a stunned official realized that the US military had gotten involved. From the White House, the American leader boldly declared that they intended to help every remaining student survive the crisis. The Japanese side protested that this foreign intervention had never been part of their emergency plan and demanded answers. Another official mocked the rushed policy revision, saying they could not just rename the first draft and call it a real solution. As aides warned that the situation had become a national emergency, the Prime Minister argued that using the US-Japan alliance for this was reckless and absurd. At the same time, the operation pushed ahead because officials admitted they lacked the manpower to deal with all affected students across Greater Kanto without outside support. A subordinate urged the Prime Minister not to panic and explained that Japan was working closely with research organizations in the United States. He added that the US would not keep the DTG cell research to itself, implying the cooperation served a much larger goal. An official grimly warned that the Americans would almost certainly look for a way to turn this crisis into a weapon. A card identified the visitor as Emily Isaki, commander of the American Special Forces DAT Division. The principal stared in shock and confirmed that Emily Isaki was an American soldier. Emily calmly explained that her team was acting under direct orders from the Japanese government and had come to impose emergency measures on the school's 17-year-old students. As Emily demanded the principal's signature, he hesitated and nervously recognized the armored vehicle outside as an M1296 Stryker Dragoon. Emily casually admitted that their arrival had destroyed the school's front gate because they needed a way to drive in. Armed troops secured the campus while aircraft hovered above, turning the school into a full military operation. Kurumi and Amamiya watched the scene in alarm and realized at once that something was terribly wrong. Soldiers spread through the school and seized control of the student area, leaving everyone confused and on edge. A soldier reported that preparations were complete and that Phase 2 was beginning, while stunned students could only watch. A soldier swept a handheld detector over a male student, and the device showed no DTG response, leaving him tense but apparently safe for now. Another scan triggered a result, and the soldier announced that DTG cells had been confirmed as the bespectacled student froze at the reading. The student loudly repeated that the result was confirmed, his panic spiking the instant the test singled him out. Over the loudspeaker, the dot insisted the checks were harmless, told everyone not to panic, and kept calmly directing the operation. The broadcast explained that the soldiers were using handheld DT detectors designed specifically to measure the level of DTG cells in each student. Students were warned that if an alarm went off during their scan, they had to obey the soldiers right away, making the entire line even more tense. Emily then announced that any flagged students they detected would be forcibly processed, and the room dropped into stunned horror. A girl quietly repeated the order to be forcibly processed, unable to process how extreme it sounded. One student turned away and said they could have handled it themselves, hinting at a desperate personal answer instead of military intervention. The student then let out a strained laugh and apologized to Amamiya-san while she stared back in startled confusion. Amamiya admitted that even if the Americans were going to force the issue on her, she still wanted to face that turning point with Kurumi, leaving him stunned by her resolve. She reminded him that he had already decided he loved her, making the moment feel even heavier. Kurumi answered awkwardly that they probably did not have enough time for that now, trying to focus on the danger closing in. Amamiya turned to him and asked if he was truly okay with this, and Kurumi could only stare in confusion. Before he could sort through his feelings, Amamiya grabbed his hand and urged Kurumi to run away with her. Outside, she pulled him forward and insisted they had to run now, while Kurumi struggled to keep up with her sudden decision. The school corridor stretched out before them as they ran, desperate to get away before the soldiers caught them. While running, Amamiya said they could escape through the back gate, and Kurumi quickly agreed to follow her lead. As they fled together, Amamiya confessed that she hated calling it losing something important, revealing how deeply the situation cut her. She explained that she wanted to share that life-changing moment only with someone she truly loved, even though her friends always mocked her for being old-fashioned and too serious. While pulling Kurumi forward, Amamiya told him to think about himself too and said choosing his own future had to be better than having that choice stolen. Kurumi was rattled, and the scene shifts into a decision neither can easily undo. Through tears, Amamiya confessed she would rather wait and face that turning point with someone who understood her fear. Running beside him, Amamiya warned that if this continued, he would be pushed past a line he had never chosen for himself. She pushed harder and asked if he did not want to grow up in his own way. Kurumi answered without hesitation that he did, and they charged down the hallway with new resolve. After stopping to check the path ahead, Amamiya asked about the situation, and Kurumi said he thought they were safe because no one was in sight. Then Kurumi thanked Amamiya and said he was leaving, his voice all of a sudden calm in a way that felt dangerous. Facing her head-on, Kurumi declared that he would make Amamiya truly fall in love with him. As he turned away, Kurumi added that it might be too early to say it, but if they ever got married, he wanted that future to be real. Kurumi instantly panicked, tried to take it back, and insisted it had only been a joke. Before he could go, Shizuno Mizushima cut him off and demanded to know where he thought he was going. She boxed Kurumi in and bluntly asked if he was still one of the targets or if he had already escaped that label. Shizuno calmly lifted her hand and prepared a device, making it clear she would verify it herself. The scanner came alive with sharp beeps, and Kurumi froze as he realized she was testing him right there. Shizuno told him to wait, then brightly confirmed that Kurumi was a level 72 virgin. Amamiya right away cut in and argued that Shizuno did not need to test him because Kurumi had the right to decide his own future. Shizuno refused to bend, so Amamiya called the whole thing wrong and urged Kurumi to run. With an annoyed smile, Shizuno brushed Amamiya off as a nuisance and stepped in to stop them. Amamiya flinched when Shizuno all of a sudden grabbed at her, and the danger around them sharpened at once. Shizuno Mizushima coldly said Kurumi should be forced across that line right there, then mocked Amamiya with a degrading insult. Kurumi stepped forward at once and demanded that Shizuno stop insulting Amamiya. Shizuno went still for a beat when Kurumi seized her arm to stop her. Enraged by the contact, Shizuno hit Kurumi hard and snapped at him for daring to put his hands on her. Kurumi staggered in shock and slammed to the ground from the blow. Towering over him, Shizuno ranted that virgins were disgusting, selfish, and pathetic, blaming them for everything she despised. Amamiya cried out for her to stop, but a commander rushed in and called to Shizuno. The commander brought the situation under control and warned Shizuno that if someone died from excessive force under their occupation, it would become a serious problem. As Kurumi lay bruised and breathed sharply, Shizuno stared down at him, then abruptly regained her composure. With her back turned, Shizuno admitted that she had lost her temper. A girl with a device over one eye offered a cheerful apology, as if the chaos could still be laughed away. The soldiers reported that all virgins had been secured, while Kurumi stood trapped among them and Amamiya watched in silent dread. Kurumi looked back in shock when Amamiya called to him and she froze for a breath as emotion overtook her. Then Amamiya stepped in close and spoke to Kurumi in a rushed whisper, leaving him stunned into silence. Holding back tears, Amamiya softly told Kurumi that this moment would stay with him, turning her words into a painful promise. As the soldiers dragged Kurumi away and barked at him to move, he cried out to Amamiya in desperation. Kurumi vowed that he would come back to her, clinging to those words as they took him away. Amamiya answered with a steady smile that she would return too and remain unchanged until then. Amamiya stood alone watching the soldiers take Kurumi away, and then the roar of an arriving aircraft signaled the operation rising again. Nearby, a soldier reported to the commander that V1rg1n's DTG level had temporarily dropped, hinting that the brief exchange had changed something crucial. A soldier asked whether the commander planned to ride back in the tank, and the commander flatly said she refused to share an osprey with the captured virgins. Watching the aircraft pull away, the girl with the eyepiece repeated Amamiya's promise with mocking disbelief and wondered if she really thought she could come back unchanged. She declared that Amamiya's promise was impossible because Kurumi was being sent to the special DTG research facility called V1rg1n Prison. The aircraft then drew near a massive fortified complex, revealing the prison where Kurumi was about to disappear.